The night shift ended with Miguel counting tips twice and still coming up short. Rent, the light bill, Luna's field trip fee due tomorrow. He did the math in his head and came up negative. The lawyer's letter sat in his jacket like a hot coal. An inheritance from a grandfather he barely knew, a remote hunting cabin that might sell fast. The car's needle hovered on fumes. Inside the envelope, a second note in messy block letters. Don't trust the hearth. Eviction notices and double shifts had his back against the wall. He decided to drive out on his day off. No more waiting. Miguel turned off the paved road and followed a rutted track that swallowed the suspension whole. The forest closed in, all needles and gray sky. Luna rode shotgun, a thrift store hoodie pulled up around her ears, watching the trees with a quiet, solemn interest that seemed older than 9. "How much longer?" she asked. 15 minutes, he said, though he had no idea. The hand-drawn map from the law office was more suggestion than certainty. A creek crossing, a collapsed fence, a stand of birch that looked like ribs. He checked each landmark like a climber checking holds. They reached a clearing where the grass grew in tough, colorless mats. The cabin sagged, as if tired of standing. Boards buckled, windows cross-hatched with weathered plywood. A rusted stovepipe leaned out of the roof like a bent finger. The place smelled like wet ash and old rope. "This is it?" Luna said. Not unkind, just confirming reality. "Yeah," he said, feeling the air shift as the storm clouds coiled above the tree line. "We won't be long." He tried his phone. 1 bar, then none. Property tax liens and unclear title history flashed through his mind. Words from the lawyer that translated to, "not easy money." He tucked the phone away and shouldered the door. It stuck, then gave with a soft tear as old paint let go. Inside, the silence was a thick thing. Dust hung. Dead flies in the windowsills. A table listing toward the cold fireplace. He felt Luna's small hand fold into his without her looking for it. "Stay close," he said. He walked the perimeter fast, eyes sweeping. A narrow cot. Pegs along the wall with an empty jacket hook. A stone hearth blackened with soot. The floorboard spoke when he stepped, complaining under his weight. He recorded everything in his head like a shop inventory. Replaceable, salvageable, sellable. What he wanted was simple. Sell fast, pay the past due notices, fix the car before the engine seized, buy Luna new shoes that didn't squeak. What stood in the way was everything else. The shaky title, the market, the storm edging closer. He crouched by the hearth. The hearthstones were uneven, char-stained in overlapping arcs, as if someone had built small, careful fires to test something. Near the ash lip, he noticed old alarm nails along the doorframe, 2 bent points that once held a wire or a bell. Paranoid or practical? He wasn't sure which. "What's that?" Luna pointed with her chin at a faded oval rug, its fringe grimy and knotted. He pulled it back and found nothing except dust and a few mouse droppings. But as he slid the rug aside, light from the cloudy window raked across the floor and caught on 4 tiny half-moons. He wiped them with his sleeve. Nail heads. Not random. 4 in a rectangle, each one polished where something had pressed against it. Miguel stared, the note in his jacket whispering, "Don't trust the hearth." He went to the trunk of his car and came back with a pry bar and a work hammer. Luna watched from the table, swinging her legs in the stale air. "Is this safe?" she asked. "We're just looking," he said, which was not the same as yes. He wedged the bar beneath a board where the nails hinted at an edge. The wood resisted, then lifted with a dry, tearing sigh. Beneath, a shallow void lined with new plywood that didn't match the cabin's age. He lifted another board, then a third. Tucked in the recess was a shallow tray, and atop it, a sachet of silica packets like a store's shoes box. Deliberate. Maintained. His heartbeat throttled. He slid the tray aside. Underneath, a recessed cavity had been cut into concrete, more modern than the rest of the room. There sat a metal box the size of a toolbox, gray paint scraped to steel at the corners. The box shifted a little when he touched it, loose in its bed, as if someone had removed it and replaced it many times. Luna's voice turned small. "Dad?" He nodded without looking at her, trying to sort caution from need. If this was illegal, it was danger. If it wasn't, it could be oxygen. He tried the latch. Locked. He set the box on the table, felt its weight, then listened. Something dense inside, not tools, not empty. Thunder broke somewhere close enough to vibrate the window glass. The first fat drops hit the roof with a metallic drumbeat. He found himself breathing through his mouth. "Okay," he said softly. "We've found something." He met Luna's eyes and forced a small smile. The cabin might be more than it looks. Outside, the rain started in earnest. Inside, the metal box waited between them, heavy as a promise, heavier as a threat. He slid it back toward himself and reached for the hammer. He wanted relief now. He wanted to walk out with enough to stop the late fees, to buy Luna shoes that didn't whistle when she ran at recess, to sleep one night without a clock in his head. What blocked him sat right in front of him, steel and doubt. If it was dirty, touching it could stain everything. If someone else claimed it, opening it could put a target on their backs. Consequence pressed like a hand on his chest. He wrapped the box in an old dish towel and tapped the latch hard with the hammer. Metal rang, dull and mean. On the third strike, the lock post snapped with a tinny pop. The lid stuck to the gasket like a held breath, then released. The smell that rose was paper sealed from air, dry, sweet, almost like a library. Inside lay bundles of bills, banded tight, rows of them, some green, edges browned with time, others so crisp they flashed. He didn't touch it first. He simply stared. The bands had handwritten dates, tiny letters along the edges. 1998, 2006, 2019. One stack bore no date at all. Rubber bands on a few were newer than the paper they held. Luna slid closer, eyes wide. "Is it money?" "It's money," he said, the words like gravel in his throat. "A lot of it." He lifted a single bundle with both hands, surprised by the weight of paper when it meant something. He pried off the band and fanned the bills, counting 10s and 20s, then 50s layered beneath. They were sequential in places, gaps in others, like someone had peeled off layers over time. No dye stains, no obvious fakes. "Is it bad money?" Luna asked. "Like from bad people?" "I don't know yet." He set the bundle down and went to the car. In the glove box, he found a counterfeit pen from his delivery job, used to mark big bills when people paid cash. Back at the table, he drew a small line on 3 different notes. The ink stayed amber. He held a bill to the window. The watermark glowed where it should. He even checked the feel, the tiny ridges, the security thread. The paper passed. They both exhaled without meaning to. Under the first layer of cash, he found a thin envelope taped to the foam lining. He slid it free and poured out 3 deposit slips from a bank branch in a county 2 hours away. Dates between 1998 and 2002. All blank except for the account field. Empty. No names. No stamped confirmations. Like someone had planned to legitimize the stash and never did. "At least some of this is old," he said, mostly to himself. He lifted another foam panel. Beneath, a cheap prepaid phone lay face down, battery taped in place. A number was scrawled on masking tape stuck over its back. No name, just 10 digits and a smear where an 11th might have started and stopped. Pinned beneath the tray, a folded note. He unfolded it with careful fingers. "Don't take it all. Leave the edges." He said it aloud. Luna frowned. "What does that mean?" "I think it means someone comes back to check. You leave a layer so it looks untouched." He looked at the box, the shallow impression of the top bundles against the lid's foam. A fitted appearance, a trick for a quick glance, a ritual of return. The floor creaked, a small reminder that the cabin had ears. He flipped through more stacks. Some were wrapped with bank straps, the kind you order by the case. Others were roughly banded with office supply rubber. The mix made no sense if this were a single haul. It looked curated, maintained, fed slowly, bled slowly. Outside, rain thickened. He glanced toward the window and thought of the trailhead. The mud there would hold prints. He remembered the faint tire tracks he'd rolled over coming in. Fresh edges, not yet softened by weather. Someone else had been here recently. Someone with a reason. "Dad?" Luna's voice had an edge now. "What are we going to do?" "We're going to be smart." He said it evenly, even as something cold stitched along his spine. He reassembled the box, returned the foam, laid the top bundles exactly as they'd been. From one stack he pulled 5 bills, then another 5, building a quiet handful. He counted out 10,000, tiny against the total, huge against their life, and slid it into his jacket's inner pocket. A lifeline, not a prize. He took photos with his phone. Serial ranges, dates on bands, the note, the deposit slips. Each picture framed with a corner of the box so it couldn't be denied later. He filmed a quick video, close on his hands, his voice low. Found in cabin, documenting, notifying if safe. He didn't say where. He didn't film Luna. "Who are you going to tell?" she asked. "Someone who understands what this is," he said, eyes on the prepaid phone. He peeled the tape, snapped the battery in. The dead screen stayed dark, then pulsed once. A weak rectangle that struggled to life. No service bars. Then one. Then none. The phone buzzed, a single tremble. Notification. 1 contact. Foreman. Before he could press anything, the screen lit again. Unknown number. Call incoming. It rang once, then cut. A text blinked in. "Snow tonight. Leave edges." He stared at the words, the exact phrase from the note. Dread and clarity arrived together. He powered the phone off, slid it back into the box and closed the lid. He wiped the metal with an old t-shirt, then returned the box to its bed, the boards to their places, the rug to its scuffed oval. He checked his prints with a dry cloth, moving backward toward the door like someone leaving a tide line intact. "We're going to town," he said, keeping his tone quiet and normal, like any dad ending a visit. "We need food, and we need the truth." Luna stood, trusting his voice more than the room. He killed the lantern. The hearth looked the same as when they'd arrived. That was the point. As they stepped into the rain, he locked the door and memorized the sound it made. The cabin sat behind them, innocent as an empty hand. The road ahead gleamed with water, and his fuel light blinked a tired amber that matched the pen marks on old bills. He steered them toward help, leaving the edges just as instructed. He drove to the next county where his face was less likely to be recognized and parked 2 blocks from a small pawn and coin shop with a neon open sign that flickered like a pulse. He told Luna they'd be quick, that they were pricing collectibles. She nodded, absorbing the fiction and the fear beneath it. Inside, glass cases held tarnished silver dollars, class rings, pocket knives with stories. The owner, a man with a tight beard and a mechanic's hands, looked up with a practiced greeting that turned sharper when Miguel set a single crisp 50 on the glass. "I get odd bills and tips," Miguel said lightly. "Some feel different. Mind taking a look?" The man slid on a loop, ran the bill under a UV lamp, tilted it to catch the thread. He didn't smile. "This one's fine." He tapped the edge with a nail. "You get a stack like this?" "Just a few," Miguel said. "You cop?" the man asked, not curious, checking risk. "No. I have." "Good." The owner lowered his voice. "Because I've seen lots pulled like this. Sequential bands, decade mix. It ain't consumer cash. That's rested money." Miguel held the word. "Rested?" "Stuff moved off jobs," the owner said. "Let it sit in places nobody visits. Time breaks the scent. People forget. I've heard about cabins, storage lockers, barns with false floors. State line spots. Cash doesn't like to be still, but it also doesn't like attention." Miguel kept his face flat. "You hear that locally?" Older timers used to mutter. He slid the bill back. Late 90s, early aughts. Crews skimmed truck stops, cash businesses, small-town robberies that never made TV. They'd park it rural. Later, one guy pulls, spends quiet. He pointed at the 50. "These come as stacks with handwritten dates? Like somebody inventoried their sins?" Miguel didn't confirm, didn't deny. The owner leaned in. "You didn't hear it from me. If it's that kind of cash, banks get curious. Cops get curious. The people who expected it to still be where they left it, they get more than curious." Back in the car, Luna studied his face. "Is it bad?" "It's complicated," he said. "But I think someone used this place as a hide, maybe for years." "Life." "What about Grandpa?" she asked. "Was he bad?" He searched the rear view instead of her eyes. "He ran a cash-only repair shop by the highway. That could have put him near whatever routes these crews used. It was plausible. It didn't make it true." They drove the long way back, rain hissing on the windshield. Near the ridge where the signal sometimes grabbed a bar, he powered the prepaid back on to see if messages had queued. The screen woke, glowed weakly, then pulsed with a single contact. Foreman. Before he could scroll, the phone buzzed. Incoming call. One ring, cut. A text appeared like a command, stamped into wet paper. "Snow tonight. Leave edges." His knuckles tightened on the wheel. "They're checking," he said, more to himself than to Luna. "They expect the stash to look the same." "Will it snow?" she asked. "Not down here," he said, dread threading irony. "But it might where they are. 10. Remove me." He pulled into a grocery lot, killed the engine, and sat in the soft drum of rain. He opened the glove box and pulled a pen, a receipt, the habits of a delivery driver who lived on small systems. He wrote the number and the words. "Snow tonight. Leave edges." He stared until the strokes memorized. If someone else still had a claim, it wasn't legal, but it was real. On the way back, he took a side road to a diner he didn't know and ordered grilled cheese for Luna, black coffee for himself. In the corner, a bulletin board held flyers for logging equipment, a Saturday swap meet, a notice about an estate sale out on Old Pike. Men at the counter told stories. When Miguel paid, The waitress, mid-50s with a kind face, asked where he was headed.
"Cabin up by the ridge," he said.
Inherited.
She made a sympathetic noise.
Those places got histories. She nodded toward a regular stirring sugar. Ask him about the crew used to run out that way. She winked. Or don't. Folks like quiet.
He left it.
Some doors you didn't open with a child at your side. Dusk pressed the trees flat as they turned up the track. He parked off the path, lights off, and listened. Wind. Rain. No engines. He walked the cabin once in a slow circle before unlocking the door. Inside, the rug lay where he'd smoothed it. The air held its old shed calm. He knelt at the hearth again, not to open it, just to look at the seams a stranger might scan. Someone else expects this to be theirs, he said quietly.
Luna held his sleeve.
But it's ours now.
He swallowed.
We'll make sure it does more good than harm. He believed it as a direction, not yet a fact. As the dark took the room, he felt the past leaning in. Not mystical, just the accumulated weight of choices other men made and hid under stone. And the text on the cheap phone confirmed what the coin man had said. Not just cash, a network, a schedule, an expectation.
Someone would come. He moved like a janitor closing a school for the night.
Methodical, quiet, purposeful. Protect Luna. Verify source. Avoid detection. Simple pillars that collapsed if he rushed. He replaced each board over the cavity, tapped nails flush, pressed the rug down so the flattened fibers lay back in their ghosts. He wiped prints with a threadbare t-shirt, backing away from the hearth, as if the floor were wet paint. He popped the hood of the car and rolled it off the track, to a pocket beneath furs, where bark dust masked tire marks. He killed the dome light and taught Luna the quiet game. Whisper once, then only hands. She smiled at the seriousness, mimed a zipper across her lips, then reached for his fingers. In the chimney's shadow, he noticed hairline seams he'd missed. 2 narrow slit vaults camouflaged by mortar, each no wider than a hand. He eased a putty knife along one edge. The panel shifted. Inside, tight rolls wrapped in waxed paper. He pulled one, then another, and felt his breath stutter. Smaller caches, different bands, different handwriting. The total, if this scale repeated, nudged a number he could barely say. 2 million. On the third panel, something small rolled free and clicked on stone. A blue glass marble, clouded with age. He held it between finger and thumb. The image of his grandfather changed shape. Gruff man at a cash drawer, but also someone who once had kids underfoot. The marble lived at the hearth's edge for years, waiting for a palm it recognized. Wind lifted. Headlights stitched distant pines, a pale sweep like a searchlight testing. Tires crunched gravel, stopped, then cut. Voices threaded the rain, low, practiced, not locals. He pulled Luna gently toward the crawlspace hatch under the cot, lifted it, and pointed in. Her eyes widened. He nodded once. She slid down without a sound. He lowered the hatch until it just kissed the frame, leaving a thin seam for air. He pocketed only the 10,000 he'd already taken and palmed the kettle from the stove, heart beating in his teeth. The lock turned. The door opened with a familiarity that made his stomach drop. Keys. They had keys. 2 men entered, rain on their jackets, boots careful. The younger one moved with impatience, a coiled spring. The older inspected edges, fingers grazing dust like a forensic sweep. "Don't bother the back room," the older said. "Pull the rest before winter. Foreman wants it clean."
Miguel's skin prickled at the name.
Foreman wasn't a contact. He was a boss.
The younger's gaze snagged on the hearthrug.
Label shifted.
Miguel felt heat rise in his face, though they couldn't see him.
The young man knelt, pinched the fringe, lifted a corner. He tapped a board. Hollow. He smiled without mirth. Neighbors haven't been careful.
Edges are edges, the older muttered.
We take our cut. We leave the look.
They moved faster now.
One tested the boards. Another ran a light along the chimney's seams. The younger reached for the pry bar clipped to his belt.
Miguel slid along the wall toward the kitchen, like a shadow learning to stand.
He placed the kettle on the very edge of a loose shelf, then reached under and tugged a nail head with the claw of his hammer. Metal squealed. The kettle crashed. The noise punched the room.
"Who's there?"
The younger snapped, gun out, pivoting toward sound. The older froze, then lifted 2 fingers, a small signal. Hold. Wind slammed the door against the jamb. The room exhaled. The men looked at each other, calculation in their eyes. Storm'll turn the road to soup, the older said. We come back with tools in daylight. Bring a jack. The floor is layered. The younger wanted to push. His jaw worked. He lowered the pry bar like it offended him, then pocketed his frustration. They backed out, the older locking the door with a small professional click. Tires spun, caught, retreated. Headlights faded into sown rain. Miguel didn't stand for a full minute, counting to 60 twice, then again. He lifted the hatch. Luna looked up, a question in her pupils. He pulled her close, until his shaking calmed her shaking. They'll be back, she whispered. Tomorrow, he said. At first light, the night narrowed. He checked the chimney slits again, slid the panels closed, padded mortar like skin. He moved through the cabin in reverse, restoring its tired posture. He set a chair at an angle it had memorized. He straightened a nail on the door trim to the bend he'd found. Every small truth put back in place. He gathered his wits into a plan that wasn't strategy so much as triage. Document everything, twice. Hide the proof where a flood or a fire wouldn't eat it all at once. Remove a small portion, oxygen, not gasoline. Make a boundary with the only leverage he had, knowledge, and the fact there was a child in the room. He filmed again with his phone at chest level, his voice stripped to facts. Serial ranges, locations, condition. He spoke a message to no one specific. If whoever you are believes this is yours, there are widows your money owes. He slid the phone's SD card into a zip bag, then into a drilled cavity beneath the porch rock. He wrote an email to a friend who'd hold a lot without asking much, and scheduled it to send tomorrow afternoon unless he stopped it.
He taught Luna a second game.
If anyone comes inside, he said softly, you stay in the crawl space. You don't speak unless I say your name twice. What if I can't hear you? Then you count 100 heartbeats and keep counting. She nodded, solemn. She tucked the marble in her pocket like a talisman, small and round and certain. Wind bent the firs like tall men leaning to listen. The rain became a sheet. He stood by the dark hearth, hands open, feeling the old house settle around them as if it too understood deadlines. He moved one last thing, the prepaid phone, onto the table where it could be seen, then turned it face down. A line drawn. He watched the door until his eyes burned, grabbed 30 minutes of sleep sitting up, and woke to silence that wasn't peace so much as a held breath. He had one night, and he'd spent it choosing a path he couldn't undo. By 3 in the morning, the storm had scraped the sky raw, and the cabin clicked in the cooling like a machine powering down. Miguel set the kettle upright again and began sorting the scraps he'd pulled from the metal box earlier. laying them on the table as if they were evidence in a case he was building against the past.
Ledger fragments, torn from a book with neat, blocky handwriting. Columns, dates, initials, amounts, some notations read like payouts. CJ, 400. RIV, 1200. Others looked like debts or cuts owed after pulls. He found a corner with the word foreman and an arrow. Foreman, hold winter edges. It made the note in his pocket feel older, not personal, procedural.
Folded into a cracked plastic sleeve, an obituary clipping. He smoothed it with 2 fingers. A woman from a town an hour south. The year 2001. Her small grocery burned. Insurance denied. A circle around the headline, in the same block print as the ledger. He felt the weight of those initials and the ash that followed. He heard Luna stir and sat until the floor stopped speaking his location. She padded out of the crawl space and climbed onto his knee, warming his thigh through denim. "Are we safe?" she asked, her voice frayed.
"For now," he said, rubbing the back of her neck with his thumb. "We will be."
"Promise?" "When I was your age," he said, keeping his tone soft, "I found a wallet on the sidewalk. It had $40 and a library card. I wanted to keep it. We needed it. But I took it to the corner store. The owner called the number on the card. The woman came crying. She said the 40 was her grocery money. The owner gave me a root beer. It was the best root beer I ever had."
Luna looked up at him.
"Did we keep the money?" "We kept the root beer," he said, and felt something inside him choose. "And I slept good that night." He lifted his phone and set it to record, front camera off, lens covered with a folded napkin, so the image was only a dark blur with sound. "If you're hearing this," he said, "it means I'm returning most of what's here. Not to the men who left it. To the people who were owed, if they can be found. If not, to a fund with oversight for harm done. I'm taking a small portion to stabilize my kid's life. I won't pretend that's not for me. But the rest isn't ours." He photographed every serial range he could reach without tearing the place apart. He named files with dates and locations in code only he would recognize later. He slid a flash drive into the laptop he kept for work orders, copied the entire folder, then ejected the stick and sealed it in a freezer bag. He pried up a porch board, tucked the bag beneath the joist, and lowered the wood back down, tapping nails to the angle they remembered. Inside, he composed an email to a friend from the shop who never asked questions, and always did the right thing anyway. He attached a subset of photos. A map drawn as a list of trees instead of turns, and a note. "If you get this, I missed a button. Call the reporter you told me about, the one who hates bullies, and feed her, slowly." He scheduled it for 2 p.m. with a delay he could cancel. He flipped the prepaid face up, turned it on, and typed to the only contact in it. "Edges left, Dawn. Bring papers." The word tasted like a dare. He considered adding "child on site," thought better of it, then added another sentence. "Proof preserved elsewhere." He hit send and felt his ribs tighten around his heart like a fist. He spread the ledger scraps again and took slower pictures. Angles, corners, the grain of the paper so it couldn't be dismissed as dressed-up junk. A line in the margins caught him. "Widows, KSD. Ask Foreman." He copied the letters onto the back of a receipt. He wasn't foolish enough to think this made him a savior. He was a man caught in a system he hadn't built, trying to tilt it 1 degree toward repair. Luna's head grew heavy against his shoulder. He carried her to the cot and pulled the old blanket up over her knees. In the lantern's low halo, she looked like the baby version of herself, cheeks soft, lashes deeper. the weight that had rearranged his life into meaning the day she arrived. He sat with that for a breath. Then he was back at the table, drafting a boundary in ink. He wrote a one-page document by hand. Acknowledge receipt of majority of cash hidden on premises. In exchange, no harm to occupants. A portion to be directed to survivors named in attached list through council. Sign here. He left lines for names. He photocopied it with the travel scanner he used to send estimates. He set a pen beside it like bait. He checked the time. 4:15. He changed his shirt, wiped his face, and pulled on the calmer version of himself like a uniform. He walked the room, touching small things that made it seem as if no human drama pulsed under the floor. Set the chair angle, the kettle, the curtains tilt, the bead of water on the windowsill. He slid the marble from Luna's pocket and placed it by the hearth, a promise to an old ghost that kids came first. He opened the door to smell the world that would greet them. The storm had moved east. The air carried the clean sting of pine and the faint iron of wet stone. A smear of pale gray at the horizon hinted at morning. He pocketed the emergency 10,000, not for bravado, but for brakes and rent and shoes that didn't whistle. It felt like theft and oxygen both. He spoke to the empty room. You don't get to own us. Then softer to the mess under the hearth. You can help make right what you broke. He closed his eyes, pictured his day if this went well. Signatures, retrieval, survival. A plan of restitution that wouldn't get him killed. He pictured the day if it didn't. Running, hiding, telling Luna they were playing the quiet game forever. He stepped back inside and locked the door. He put his hand flat on the table, steadying the tremor he didn't want Luna to see. Across that old wood, a phone face down waited for an answer. He had asked for papers. He had offered proof. He had left the edges. He watched the window gray, and he waited for footsteps. Gray seeped into the windows like a slow confession. Miguel stood in the doorway with his palms visible, the hand-signed page on the table behind him, the prepaid phone face down beside it. Luna breathed quietly beneath the cot. Her heart beat the metronome he set his courage to. Outside, tires whispered mud, then stopped. Boots sank, then lifted. 3 silhouettes took shape through cedar and steam. They moved like men who belonged to places that didn't love them back. The first was older, shoulders square beneath a canvas coat, a worn ledger tucked under his arm in a sealed bag. The second and third held distance and angles, one younger with a jaw that never settled, the other with eyes that counted exits. "Foreman?" Miguel called, calm like a greeting over a fence. "Empty hands, and we talk." The older man lifted both palms to shoulder height. "Talking," he said, voice like gravel. "Open your door so we don't shout." Miguel stayed in the frame. "My kid's asleep. We can talk right here," he nodded at the ledger. "You brought papers. I brought proof the edges stayed." Foreman's gaze flicked to the table and back. He studied Miguel's face as if cross-referencing it against an old file. "What'd you take?" "A sliver," Miguel said, "to keep the lights on and shoes on her feet. The rest is where you left it. Documented. Stored off-site if this turns ugly." The younger man's voice came fast, contempt pressed into syllables. "You don't set terms in our house." "This isn't your house," Miguel said quietly. And the money was never clean. Foreman let the moment stretch. He lifted the bagged ledger slightly. "Your grandfather's name appears, not as a thief, as a keeper. He held, traded edges, kept clocks. He didn't skim." "He's gone," Miguel said. "I'm not him. I don't run errands for men who sign ledgers instead of their names. A pause. Then the third man spoke for the first time. Low. We're burning time. Foreman nodded once, conceding the schedule. You said papers. Miguel lifted the handwritten acknowledgement. Foreman stepped to the threshold, careful as if approaching a skittish horse, and read. His mouth flattened at widows named as initials, at the promise to direct a portion through council. You're not stupid, Foreman said. That's good. Stupid men don't survive mornings like this. The younger man crowded forward. We take it all. He's playing lawyer to buy time. His hand brushed the grip at his hip like a nervous tick. Foreman lifted 2 fingers without looking. The younger froze, vibrating. Show me, Foreman said. Then we talk numbers. Miguel held his place. I'll show you the lid lifted, and the top as you left it. We don't gut the floor with my kid 10 feet away. Foreman considered, then nodded. Fair. He stepped back, angled his head at the third man. Watch outside. To the younger. Breathe. They entered in a triangle, Foreman first, Miguel beside, the younger pulling the door closed behind them with a click that sounded too familiar. The room held the shape Miguel had given it in the night. The rug lay square. The kettle sat where a kettle should. The marble by the hearth caught the weak light like a tiny eye. Foreman crouched and lifted the rug's edge, fingertips testing dust patterns. He touched the nails like he might bless them, then looked up. You clean. I lived, Miguel said. There's a difference. He pried a board with the tool he'd left visible. Let it lift just enough to breathe. The box lay in its cradle, paint scar bright at corners, foam impression unbroken. Foreman didn't reach. He leaned and inhaled, smelling paper like history. He tapped a corner, listening for hollowness beneath hollowness. Satisfied, he eased the board back and smoothed the rug with his palm. Edges left, he said, reciting the ritual. You're careful. I'm tired, Miguel said. Careful keeps tired people alive. The younger moved, impatient. He kneed the hearthstone to test it, and then, angry at stone for being stone, kicked the panel hard near the base. Concrete shifted with a dull, new sound. Not the tone of the cavity they all knew. A seam they hadn't mapped trembled. Dust lifted like breath. The younger crouched, greed waking like an old dog smelling meat. He shone a small light and saw plastic, tight-wrapped bundles deeper than the first bed. His voice rose, triumphant and ugly. There's a second belly. Foreman's face didn't move, but something in his eyes hardened at the word. He looked at Miguel. Miguel stepped instinctively between the hearth and the cot, the animal geography of fatherhood rearranging the room. No more, Miguel said, palm open, empty. You signed the ritual yesterday when you told me edges. You take the older cache. You leave the deeper bundle sealed. We put names to paper. You walk. We don't meet again. The younger laughed. You think this is a town hall? Miguel didn't look at him. He pointed at the table with 2 fingers. Photos, serial ranges, off-site copies. If I don't press cancel by 2, someone without a reason to fear you starts asking questions. Widows get phone calls. An attorney gets evidence you can't burn. Foreman glanced at the ledger bag in his arm, then at the handwritten acknowledgement. He worked his jaw, considering something beyond greed. Math that included funerals and favors, boys who didn't come home, and the cost of heat. Finally, he set the ledger on the table and uncapped the pen. Your granddad was a keeper, he said. He kept men from killing each other when the horses were hot and winter was long. He'd say what you're asking is ugly, but fair. He signed Foreman in block letters, then wrote a number beneath. This cut funds survivors. I'll send a list. You send copies to a lawyer who won't sell us. The younger bristled. You can't. Foreman's voice sliced clean. I can. Put your mouth away. He looked back at Miguel. We retrieve the majority. We leave the belly. We leave your kid unseen. He angled his chin. You'll never run into me again unless you go looking. Miguel nodded, the tremor easing in his hands by a degree. Then we do it fast and quiet. Outside, the storm broke into a thin sun, dew lighting the grass like loose change. For a breath, the room held a small, balanced silence, the kind that could hold. Then the younger's boots slid, toe catching the seam he'd awakened, and the house remembered everything men tried to hide. The younger man lunged for the seam he'd exposed, the pry bar flashing up as if greed had a blade. Foreman moved first, forearm slamming into the younger shoulder and shoving him sideways. The pry bar clipped the stove, and a gun barked once. Metal rang, the shot burying into cast iron with a dull thunk that smelled like hot oil and old fear. Luna yelped under the cot. The sound was small and complete. It cut through every calculation like a bell. Foreman's head snapped toward the cot. His hand came up, palm out. Guns down, he said. Not loud, but final. Not in front of a kid. The third man at the door holstered, eyes still measuring escape and witnesses. The younger hovered between fury and shame, breath shaking the pry bar, finger away from the trigger now because someone older had told him where a line lived. Foreman bent and pressed the hearthstone with his knuckles like a doctor checking for a pulse. He looked at the seam, then at Miguel. We leave the belly sealed, he said, making the choice a sentence. You hold your end. I hold mine. He took the acknowledgement sheet and signed again. Full name this time. Letters square. He pulled a folded paper from the ledger bag and slid it across. Widows, he said. Names and towns. Some are gone. Some might still answer a knock. He set the prepaid on the table. Keep that. If you breathe wrong, don't call me. If you breathe right, send the photos to the lawyer at the bottom. They worked without breaking the room's shape. Boards lifted, the upper layer came out and measured stacks. Counted aloud. Logged with initials. Foreman spoke like he was reading headstones. The younger carried bundles in silence. Steps smaller than when he'd entered, the stove scar and the caught breath of a child holding him like a hand on his collar. When the first bed was bare, Foreman placed the foam back the way he'd found it, and smoothed the rug with a slow swipe that felt like respect. He signed the second copy of Miguel's document and pressed it flat with his palm. No returns, he said. No visits. The belly is a winter we don't open. The younger couldn't help himself. You're leaving fat on a bone. Foreman looked at him, and for a second the room felt like a church. We already took more than we ever fed, he said. This is as close to square as men like us get. He turned to go, then stopped and touched the list he'd given Miguel. They weren't saints, he said. None of us are. But their men didn't come home, and we didn't pay. You do better, because you can. The door opened. Mud spoke. Tires found ruts and left. Silence pooled back into the corners. Miguel stood very still and counted his breaths until he could hear Luna's again. He lifted the cot and pulled her into the light. She clung to him, then pulled back to look at his face. Are they gone? She asked. For us, yes, he said. He meant today. He meant maybe. He looked at the hearth. The seam no longer screaming, just whispering, like a secret that knew it was safer unspoken. He placed the marble back on the stone and let his hand rest there a second. An old promise paid a little. He sorted the papers into two piles. What bound him and what freed him. The acknowledgement with signatures went into a plastic sleeve. The widow's list he read once, then again, letting the names land like small, painful seeds. He opened the laptop and sent the photo set to the attorney on the list with a line. "I'll send originals if we can meet where you can keep us safe." Then he canceled the delayed email to his friend and drafted a new one. "We're okay. Hold the drive. If I don't check in 3 days, give it to the lawyer named below." He fixed the lock, tightened the hinge screws the younger's kick had jolted loose. He made coffee, because hands need work when minds are untangling. He and Luna sat on the step with steaming cups, her milk sweet, his black. The morning a pale coin in the trees. "We're not rich," Luna said, as if stating the rules of a game. "No," he said, "we're not. We're steadier." "What happens to the rest?" she asked, glancing toward the hearth that had held more than heat. "Some of it goes to people who were hurt," he said. "Some stays sleeping. Some keeps the light on and your shoes quiet." She smiled at that, then slipped her hand into his. "Can we go home now?" "Hi." "Yeah," he said. "We can go home." He locked the door and memorized the sound it made again. A small, ordinary click that told the room they had left it as kindly as they could. On the drive out, the ruts felt shallower. The fuel light was still on, but the panic around it had eased. There are kinds of full that don't happen at gas stations. At the highway, he checked the mirror and saw only road. Weeks later, Miguel parked 2 towns over and walked up a cracked driveway with an envelope tucked inside a library book. He set the book on a widow's porch and stepped back. Through the screen, a kettle whistled. Down the block, a different porch held a stamped envelope already lifted by wind. Someone else had received help first. He straightened, feeling lighter. If this story touched you, share it with someone carrying more than they can say. We tell human stories of resilience and unexpected discovery every week. Subscribe and watch the next chapter where small choices turn hidden money into healing.